Live everywhere.
Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman, Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, July 24th, 2018. Time for yet another show. Daily Kos Radio is live now. We are reminded all the way from Portland, Maine. Thanks, Bill. Tune in to hear Kagro X. That's me. Shout security clearance. We don't need no stinking security clearance. And I could put on an accent for that, or I could pretend I was Donald Trump for that. And it would, it would help give some context to it. Yeah, a little bit of a flap, I guess, and it's still going on. And then, of course, the requisite round of hot takes that include lecturing us that we were being distracted from some bigger picture by looking at the question of security clearances. And that may, who knows, that may or may not be true. That was the big deal yesterday. And it's interesting. It makes for an interesting story, that's for sure. Very much a Trump story, and it could very well be a distraction from something. I am losing faith in Donald Trump's crazy, wacky ability to distract us effectively from various things by bringing up things that are equally dumb or worse. I am not certain that that's working for him. But, it's increasing the chaos coefficient, I guess. But, how effective it is in getting people off of the main story, like, say, Trump-Russia, which is, poised to see him perhaps removed from office at some point, though. I think it's perhaps, it may just always have been a pipe dream, but it's certainly, no one's been distracted from that, no matter what he could come up with. But, I guess the word was yesterday, the president is considering, and then Sarah Huckabee Sanders perpetuates it by, reconfirming it in the press conference. Yeah, thinking about revoking the security clearance of a number of people, including former CIA director, is that right? John Brennan, and constant Trump critic, but also pretty much everyone who has ever been a Trump critic and who has a security clearance. And that would include, of course, targeting James Comey, who I guess still has his security clearance, or I guess doesn't operate at the same level. But I suppose that there's some sort of lower level occupational security clearance that sort of travels with you unless it's revoked. But if you're no longer at the head of the FBI, I assume there is some difference in the level of your access with your security clearance once you are fired as FBI chief. But I don't think. I guess another question is, have any of them been interested in exercising their right to access classified materials since leaving office? And I don't know whether that's the case or not. In other words, it may just be kind of a stupid and empty threat just to show that you can do things or make threats. And the interesting backstory to it, I guess, was I did see last night on Twitter somewhere, and I don't even know if I put it away somewhere because I didn't plan on spending a great deal of time on the story, though it is once again indicative of the sort of attitude that the Trump administration takes towards things you're supposed to take seriously. Security clearance is something that's supposed to be taken seriously, and it should certainly be an apolitical thing. If you can exhibit the correct characteristics of loyalty to the United States, and who knows what that means anymore, and trustworthiness in other areas of your life, the security clearance isn't something you should be monkeying around with. But to hell with that, says Donald Trump. But the thing I read about yesterday was, first we read that it was Rand Paul who was essentially claiming credit for running around and saying, we need to be able to revoke security clearances. And he was talking, I think, at that moment anyway. He may have been talking about more than just Brennan. But the idea spread. Michael Musson, by the way, commenting alongside all of this, FBI policy, and you would think this is the case, FBI policy is to cancel security clearance when a person leaves the FBI. So that whole angle of it, the James Comey angle of it, at least, was a publicity stunt. Maybe the whole thing was a publicity stunt. But by mid-morning, the story was, well, Rand Paul was suggesting this, and he made a big deal on Twitter of, I am going to be meeting with the president today, and I'm going to suggest that these security clearances be revoked. And I think he made a big deal out of it because he knew already that the president was considering it, because the president is crazy, and of course he would be considering it. So, he was setting himself up for, being super effective. When I say, I'm going to suggest something to the president, you can believe that the president's going to do it, because that's the kind of relationship we have. I guess that was supposed to be the play. Though it turns out that there were a number of other people already suggesting exactly that, and Rand Paul was a latecomer to it. What I found interesting, and I guess we'll see if we can dig up the tweet that I may have seen. Like I said, I didn't put it aside. But the allegation, at least in the tweet, was that several people, and several relatively fringy figures at that, had been suggesting for quite some time that revoking security clearances was a way to effectively punish political enemies. Of course, their list of targets were likewise out of office, so I don't know how effective the plan to revoke their security clearances really would have been, considering that at least some of them would not have had their security clearances for some time, and so nothing was actually being done. But as I recall, the allegation was that people as fringy as Gateway Pundit and whatever his real name is, I can't even remember anymore, and Sebastian Gorka. Oh, and I have a sound clip for Sebastian Gorka. I haven't had to use it yet.
That dreadful Hungarian?
Yes, I don't know if you can actually tell what that is. I recorded it off of, YouTube. I think the other night we were flipping around the television and My Fair Lady was on, and we happened to see this scene in which Professor Higgins is recounting what happened at, the Embassy Ball, right, where he runs into one of his former students there who attempts to sleuth out who Eliza Doolittle actually is, and he's a Hungarian guy, as I understand it, and Professor Higgins' housekeeper asks, here's the story and says, that guy was there, that dreadful Hungarian, and so it's both poor audio and a very thick English accent, but that's what it is.
That dreadful Hungarian?
Sebastian Gorka.
That dreadful Hungarian?
That dreadful Hungarian. That's the guy. Apparently he was in on this, and does he have a security clearance anymore? Who knows? He was fired from the White House. His wife has one, so I'm sure she sneaks whatever secrets are necessary to him for him to, run around pretending he was a cool guy with his stupid car and a stupid gun, by the way. We could segue to some gun stories that I've seen today that make up an interesting thread, something we've discussed before. But anyway, it seems that the point of this other person's tweet was to show how, once again, stupid, fringy ideas that have no basis in reality were filtering their way from morons' blogs and also the heads of dreadful Hungarians to the highest levels of the White House, because the president is a gullible idiot and a fanboy of moronic blogs and, the people who write them and the people who enjoy them. And so it's very easy to push him in a moronic direction. One, he's already there, and two, he loves moronic ideas. So by the end of the day yesterday, that had made it all the way to the White House, and a significant portion of the press corps spent a significant portion of their day on it, and I understand that it may all have been a waste of time, in addition to being idiotic in its motivation to begin with. Michael's second comment here, the security clearance threat would make current employees think twice about criticizing the dotard, and that, I guess, is the more valuable part of the threat, except One, I think that's been relatively clear from the beginning. And two, if you get fired from your job in the national security apparatus, wherever it is you are that requires security clearance, for the most part, that'll probably be the biggest impact, and you won't be boo-hooing a whole lot about your security clearance. There are places where it could make a difference. And, of course, it's a nasty and boorish kind of threat to make, so leave it to the Trump White House to make sure that they fast-tracked it for the afternoon press conference. So, anyway, there's information out there about that, and perhaps we'll cover it and discuss it a little bit and see if we can find out more about it. Let's see, other things that have caught my attention today. I told you there was a gun issue that caught my attention today, and let's see, I'll click all the way back to try and find the chain of custody, as it were, here. But as I recall, it was Sponson's, our friend Sponson's tweet earlier, was it early this morning or probably late last night, sending me a gun fail, 6 hours ago, so early hours of the morning, or very late at night if you're West Coast, Sponson. The tweet of Aaron Alberti, who is a reporter for the Salt Lake Tribune, it looks like, and reporting, so it was one of those basic local gun fail stories that everybody thinks of as perhaps a local interest story at best. Sometimes they blow up, sometimes they don't. Sometimes it's inclusion in and discussion by the gun fail list that makes it blow up. Sometimes it makes it on its own. And I don't even know that this is going to get a great deal of scrutiny. But I think we saw this story the other day, and maybe it was Sponson who shared it with us. But it was another incident of bathroom gun fail. And, it's been a thing with me, and I bring it up from time to time. And every once in a while there's a high-profile case, and everybody laughs about it because, tee-hee, bathroom. It's funny. And people chuckle about it, and they assume that it is one of those weird and wild, true news stories that's just so wacky, news of the weird sort of thing that you might see, listed in one of the alternative newspapers, that old News of the Weird column that ran in a lot of city paper weekly type things. But it's real and it's a phenomenon, and it deserves some, at least, national consideration in that it happens so frequently, and that it happens in a certain way. It very frequently happens with people who are new to carrying weapons daily, though it happens just as often to people who are supposedly very experienced in carrying their weapons, and I think it happens for slightly different reasons, although ultimately, the reason at bottom is the same for everyone, but I guess the mindset of the brand new gun carrier is, I forgot I was even carrying a gun, or I have no procedures, I have no habitual procedures about how to deal with my gun when I go to the bathroom. That's the problem at bottom for both experienced gun users and newbies, as it were. Apparently, no one has there's no suggested protocol. There's all kinds of other protocol. If you're at the firing range or whatever, you're handling your weapons, remember, always check the chamber and da-da-da, and of course the basic gun rules, safety rules, know what's behind your target and what's your backstop, and never put your finger on the trigger until you're ready to shoot, and never aim your gun at anything unless you intend to kill it, and never assume a gun is unloaded, assume all guns are loaded. We've been through the weapons policies or the gun safety rules in the past, but yet no one has developed a universal protocol for what to do if you're wearing a gun and have to go to the bathroom. Because, of course, if you're using a holster, if you're smart, you're using a holster. Holster is probably attached to your belt, or at the very least the waistband of your pants, or in the pocket of your pants. And if you're using the bathroom, at least in certain ways, pants get dropped. and you don't want the weapons to drop. But people puzzle over this apparently all the time. So it happens to, like I said, it happens to people who are new to carrying weapons because they don't know what to do with their weapon. And it happens to people who are experienced, although it might happen as much as it does to people who are experienced because they've been carrying weapons for longer and eventually they're just going to have that accident. They do this every day, and 99% of the time they do it successfully and don't forget their gun in the bathroom. And then, but if you do anything enough, you will make that mistake eventually. Anyway, somebody made that mistake in Utah, and what a place to make a mistake. This Aaron Alberty's tweet reads, in brief, gun owner won't be charged for leaving a loaded handgun with a round in the chamber and the safety off in a restroom inside a children's play area at a Utah aquarium. And the aquarium, of course, has a posted no weapons policy. So, obviously, the only possible outcome here, don't charge the gun owner. They have done nothing wrong because, after all, she didn't mean to forget the gun, says the DA. That's the story here, and let's take a look at the way it's covered at length in the Salt Lake Tribune. Is it Aaron's own story? It is. Congratulations, Aaron. You got the byline on that one. Utah mom won't be charged for leaving a loaded gun in aquarium restroom near children's area. DA sees a gap in the law and apparently made use of it, too. I'm sure he thinks his hands are tied. Here's a picture, by the way, of the restrooms, or at least the outside. I think there's some pictures maybe of the inside in here, too. No, it wouldn't be necessary. It would be rather an odd intrusion. But a picture of the outside really tells the story. It really is in a children's play area. As you can see from the photo, if you follow the link, if you're listening live and you saw that tweet go out live, you can follow the links back. I mean, it's a bathroom in a children's play area. It's just as it's explained. There's, climbing equipment and playhouses and little picnic tables, and there's little kids visible all over, toddlers. This is a, very young children's play area. Decorations on the walls, painted cartoonish seahorse here. And the bathrooms are right there in the middle, as they should be, because that's what kids need when they're in their play area. But leave a loaded gun in there, and you're just asking for trouble. Not that the DA will give you any, apparently. A Utah mom will not be charged after she left a loaded handgun on a diaper changing table, because who uses those, right? In a restroom near a children's play area at the Loveland Living Planet Aquarium. Now, I don't know whether it's covered in this article. I don't know whether she was changing a infant or toddler and put the gun down next to that child. I don't think so, but the diaper changing table is another area where those things frequently get put down. People just don't know what to do with them. And if you're wearing a belt holster, sometimes people will hang them on any hooks on the backside of the doors of the stalls. If not, the most common problem is leaving them. People will try and balance their weapons on top of the toilet paper dispensers, which results in one of two problems: either leaving them behind if everything goes really well, but they make a mistake anyway. They leave the gun behind on the toilet paper dispenser. If things go poorly, even before they leave, they have knocked the gun off of the top of the toilet paper dispenser. And then all the guns that were assured do not fire if dropped, fire when dropped. And, lots of trouble ensues. And of course, some of those incidents probably do include guns that really won't fire if dropped, but they've accidentally fired them in some other way. And then the police come and they say, but I thought these guns didn't fire when dropped. Then they make up some kind of a story or whatever. But very often, the police usually are happy to, well, I don't know if they're happy or not, but they're willing to let the whole thing go by having somebody say, I dropped it and it went off, or I was cleaning it and it went off. Cleaning it doesn't fly as often in the public restrooms. So I dropped it and it went off thing is usually a better story. And it goes over better than sometimes the real story is I was simply reholstering my weapon and I accidentally fired it because I'm an idiot. And I did one of several things, accidentally put my finger on the trigger, and forgot to remove it as I holstered it. And then the actual side of the holster pushed my finger up, and you can usually tell depending on, where there are powder burns or what trajectory the bullet took. But people make up stories all the time. Anyway, back to the story itself. The woman didn't knowingly abandon her gun in the restroom. Prosecutors wrote in a letter to the Draper police, so they couldn't build a case for reckless endangerment. I think, of course, leaving your gun loaded someplace is per se reckless endangerment, and they really ought to remedy that legislatively. In the letter, Salt Lake County prosecutors wrote that the woman had called Draper police in search of the missing gun. Oops, I forgot my gun. I just realized I had a loaded gun. Where did I put that thing? Responsible gun owner. You know how that goes. She called the Draper police in search of the missing gun July 10th, the day that visitors had found it in a restroom next to the aquarium's Tukey's Island indoor playground, because all the adults are hanging out there. Aquarium staffers have said there is a posted no weapons policy, but the woman brought the gun in a holster and took it off in the restroom. Wow, I'm so wacky. Yes, there's a posted no weapons policy. People never look for it. They don't look for it, and they don't care. And quite honestly, I've seen so many messages on gun owner and gun enthusiast message boards that say, look, the way to deal with, how do you handle your concealed carry weapon when you encounter these ubiquitous weapons, posted weapons prohibitions? You know how if you're not familiar, how the law usually goes in most states, or how they pretend. And this is really what the story is all about, why I share these stories, or this story in particular. The pretend game is when gun-crazy legislatures pass new rules allowing concealed carry or open carry, or in any way loosen the rules about carrying weapons in daily life. People object. It's dangerous, it's scary, it's foolish, it's risky, whatever the objections are. And then there are the accusations that get traded. Well, you're a gun grabber, you're a communist, why don't you go back to Russia? Oh, wait, we love Russia now, sort of thing. You know how it goes. And anyway, the usual compromise is, what often gets them to compromise is conservatives that then say, well, what about private property rights? If there's something that conservatives are willing to say they love almost as much as gun rights, it's usually private property rights. And so sometimes that's persuasive. And so they can usually wrestle out this compromise. Well, okay, guns are allowed. You can carry your guns everywhere. But when it comes to private property owners still retain the right to ban carrying guns on their property. But what they have to do is prominently post a notice at all the entrances that say that weapons of any kind are prohibited, or whatever the language is that they decide on in that state. And some states are real sticklers, and the notice has to be on a sign at least of this size, and you'll have people suing to say the sign isn't big enough or whatever, or it has to have a certain color scheme, or, there's an official piece of signage that gets used and has to be posted this high off the ground, etc. The thing is, it's posted usually in those areas of entrance ways that people are conditioned to ignoring all the, all the clutter around. I am here to go to an aquarium. I don't stop and read over on the side of the door. I mean, even if it's painted on the door here, as it is in this case, open daily, Monday, 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. and then Tuesday to Sunday, the hours are painted on there. And that way, a lot of people know that's where to go to look for the hours of a place. But do you read them on the way in? Do you take note, or you simply say, that's clutter that I can successfully block out of my brain because they're open now? That's what's interesting to me. Then over in the side, you'll see the little signs. Was it no soliciting maybe is over there. No pets allowed. Service dogs are welcome. There's a note there that says that. And then there you can see the notice, no weapons. Weapons of any kind prohibited. And like I said, on the gun owners forums, the commenters are only a little too giddy in telling people, here's how you deal with this nonsense, this idea that private property rights are more important than your gun rights, or rather, I should say, your safety. What if a terrorist attacks the aquarium? All right. What if MS-13 comes in and tries to rob everybody while they're looking at the fish? Yeah, all the realistic scenarios. But they very often just say, just ignore those things. Yeah, the law says they have that right. But in most cases, don't worry about it. You get a slap on the wrist is essentially what they say. Now, then people who really screw up and fire their weapons and shoot somebody, I guess you're potentially in more trouble, but not always. Like this woman, for instance. She didn't shoot anybody, but she screwed up and she left the gun there. And there's the notice, the one that's supposed to cancel all your gun rights because property rights. But guess what happens? Ultimately, they didn't really care. And the reason is pretty simple. And the fact that it happened in Utah only makes the parallel that much greater. They don't enforce these things. You know how you sometimes get handed the line by gun enthusiasts and gun rights enthusiasts? Enforce the laws that are already on the books. We don't need any more laws. No more gun control. If you just enforce the laws that are on the books, you'll take guns out of the hands of criminals. People who are dangerous won't have guns. And, of course, the one that they don't mention, presumably included in that, would be that if private property owners don't want weapons on their property, or don't recommend that you carry your weapons on your property, then that won't happen. Only it does happen, and it happens fairly frequently, and gun owners are only too happy to suggest to one another, nobody takes those things very seriously. Just bring your guns. There was one guy, infamous, stuck out in my mind, just told everybody, I know, Disney properties, they don't allow guns. Bring them anyway. LOL, what are they going to do? And that turns out to be true. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching Kagro X or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Just poking around the internets a little bit during the break, but we should continue on with the story out of Utah because it is a pretty interesting one, to me anyway. And it's, kind of infuriating. And that's what we do. We come here first thing in the morning to infuriate ourselves more than anything else. But you get the gist. Gun owners love to recommend to one another in secret on comment boards on the internet that you're pretty safe just ignoring those stupid laws about the private property owner's rights and, other people's worries about your weapon because you're a responsible guy. You're a responsible, law-abiding citizen, and that's why it's okay for you to have a gun. It's fine that the only law that you choose, you do pick and choose a little bit about which laws you do and don't obey. Like, I won't obey those laws that say I can't bring my gun to certain places. And there's a whole, pseudo-legal theory, behind all of this, too. Very often they say, well, the right to carry arms is constitutional. You can't overrule that with a stupid sign, according to state law. And they might even have a point. There might be a they're not necessarily constitutional scholars. They just feel like they want to have their guns everywhere and that guns are super important. And because they're very frightened people who really do think that MS-13 might, storm the aquarium or any place for that matter, I got to protect they always go right back to that. I got to protect my family. I got to protect my family. Now, very often they accidentally shoot themselves with these guns, or members of their families, or very often they intentionally shoot themselves and members of their families with those guns. But in the meantime, they're super safe, and there's no way you can convince them that some stupid property rights thing that isn't even in the Constitution, the way the Second Amendment is, could possibly trump their gun rights. And so they just say ignore them. And they're largely right, because look what happens. We'll return to the Salt Lake Tribune story here. Puts it this way. Let's see. So she, did they give her name? I don't even remember. Did they? That's something all by itself. They won't even give her name. Who did this thing? Well, we can't tell you because there was no crime. No one got shot, so no harm, no foul. She, whoever it is, told police that she had to use the restroom and she was chasing her children around the restroom and accidentally forgot about the firearm. So her children are in there. She's got the gun off and sitting there and chasing them around. Why? And also just one of those things. Again, people think I'll get a gun and I'll wear it and we'll all be safe because gun. And then they never give any thought to what sorts of activities am I going to be involved in today? Is it appropriate for me to be wearing a gun in a holster if I'm wrestling with with a child? Play wrestling. I've seen that happen too before, Oh, I'll wrestle with my nephew. He loves to wrestle. I'll wrestle with him for fun. But I won't take my gun off. Because if I take my gun off and I put it down, my nephew might find it and accidentally fire it. So I'll keep it on. Oh, we're wrestling? That's okay. Plenty of people wrestle with guns strapped to them all the time. Haven't you seen professional wrestling? Don't they always? I think that's true. So let's go. Or I just forgot. Or whatever. Or I don't care. I'm just an idiot. That happens too. Well, if you're going to be chasing your kids around the bathroom or you're taking them to the aquarium, there's a fair chance you're going to be chasing kids around and you're going to be squirming and then, there's lots of kids around and any of those kids could be MS-13. That's why you brought the gun, right? So there she is. She takes her gun off. She puts it down on the changing table and then chases her kids around. No other kids could possibly enter the bathroom whom she would ignore because they're not hers and wander over to use the bathroom and then see the changing table down and, ooh, boy, fun, a gun is out there. I'll pick it up and play with it. Well, I didn't intend for that to happen. I know. So what? The rule's pretty simple. I mean, you broke all the safety rules. Forget the posted no weapons policy. You're a responsible gun owner. You've lost control of your weapon. You placed a loaded gun with a round chambered down on a table. So at a firing range, that would be against the rules. At a firing range, if you're going to put your gun down, you got to make it safe. If you're going to stop shooting and walk away from your gun and you take it down and you're supposed to not only make it safe, if it's a semi-automatic, you take out the magazine and eject whatever round might still be in the chamber and then verify it visually and stick your finger in there too and make sure there's somehow some round in there that you didn't see visually. And only then can you place your gun down with the chamber, the open side up, facing up, so that anybody who comes by can see that this is a gun that's been rendered safe and that there's no round chambered. But, like I said, in a firing range, it would get you in trouble to do that. But, on a diaper changing table in the bathroom in a children's play area of the aquarium, hang on. I have more important things to do than mind gun safety. I need to chase children around the bathroom. All right. That seems to be enough of an excuse. Apparently it worked. She said that both her children crawled under the bathroom stall and ran off. She said she hurriedly dressed herself and ran after the children and forgot about the gun, which again presents another problem. I guess what she's saying is, and maybe this part is true because she's clearly a little paranoid, and we're all a little paranoid when it comes to our kids, right? It's safety. You don't necessarily want to say, play here in the play area while I go to the bathroom and just stay there and come back and find your children Kidnapped by Mormon MS-13 aquarium lovers. You never know what combination of dangers might confront you. But okay, you don't want to leave your kids alone. And, it's also not necessarily all that polite to leave your kids, running rampant through the play area with no supervision. So you bring your kids into the bathroom with you. Do you have to go to the bathroom? I have to go to the bathroom. We don't have to go, Mom. Well, you got to come in here because I'm not leaving you out there. And then I guess you get, I don't know how old the kids are. They're tiny, I guess. They can crawl or are willing to crawl on the bathroom floor to get out of the stall. Some of those doors are pretty low. Maybe they're small kids. She might have brought them into the stall, and presumably at that point you go to the handicapped stall, which again is probably wrong and against the rules, and you shouldn't do it unless you absolutely need the handicapped stall. You don't just use it because you want more space, but you can give a break to a harried mom, I guess, who decides that for security's sake, she's going to go to the bathroom and she's going to make her two kids stand in the stall with her while she goes to the bathroom so that she doesn't lose sight of them. It's a little awkward, but I could see it happening. And, you want to protect your kids. And fine, whatever. But they crawled under the door and ran away. So maybe they're not the most disciplined kids in the world. You should probably be threatening to shoot them, and then they would have better discipline. Okay? Just saying. And then you keep them in. Now, interestingly enough, one security measure she's willing to take, because MS-13 loves aquariums. One security measure she's willing to take, I will bring a gun with me everywhere, really, but to the aquarium in particular, in case of, MS-13 scuba attack. I don't know, whatever might happen. A shark jumps out, and it's a land shark, and he comes after us, and my stun gun doesn't work on it, and I just absolutely have to kill the shark. Whatever the reason. Yes. Squirmy kid stuff like, I don't really necessarily approve of these things, but I've seen for people who have particularly squirmy and escape-prone toddler types, those harnesses and leashes. I don't advocate them, but I don't frown on them either. Parents know whether they need those things or not, or maybe they overdo it a little bit. Who knows? It's not for me to say. I'm just saying, like if you're worried about your kids running off, that's one way to keep them with you. Another way, though, to keep your kids from escaping is, well, if they run away, I have my gun. I guess I could just wing them. I'll shoot them in the leg and take them down. And then, it's a flesh wound. We'll get the bullet extracted and a little bit of physical therapy. You'll be fine. I doubt very much whether that's anybody's child control plan, but it's out there. And I just think, people dismiss it out of hand because, it's dangerous, or you might kill the child accidentally. But I'm pretty sure that if I can shoot a gunman in body armor in a darkened theater, I think I can tell the difference between my kid's torso and his legs. Come on. Just as I would shoot out the tires of anybody charging at us in a hit and run situation with an automobile, just as I would bullseye a shooter in body armor in a darkened theater, surely I can take a kid out below the kneecap, or maybe one in the thigh or something like that. Anyway, just saying that no other safety protocols presented themselves to this woman except bringing the gun in case MS-13 terrorist attack, or just maybe a lone wolf, for instance, decides it's time to prowl the aquarium play area. You never know. Anyway, so she had the kids in the stall with her, and they decided to foil the whole plot and crawl underneath and take off. And then she, pardon me, boy, really having a hard time with it this morning here. She hurriedly dressed herself and then ran after the children and forgot about the gun, which now poses a different question. The gun's on the diaper changing table outside of the stalls, I think. Although I guess it's possible that one really huge family stall could be in there, and that's the one she chose and not the handicapped one. And there's a diaper changing table in there. But in most bathroom layouts, the diaper changing table is outside of the stalls. So my question is, did she take the gun off and put it on the diaper changing table and then corral the whole family in the stall and go to the bathroom and leave the gun out there? Or did she go into the bathroom with the kids, close the stall door, take off the gun or whatever, or leave it in her pocket if she had a pocket holster or whatever, go to the bathroom, the kids crawl out, she dashes out the door, pulls up her pants, and in so doing, pulls up her pants and the gun holster begins to get in the way because it's in the pocket holster. She takes it out and puts it on the diaper changing table and then dashes after the kids, or what? At some point, she very foolishly decides to take the gun off her person and put it on a diaper changing table. It'll be okay here. MS-13 might invade an aquarium. But the idea that they would come to the diaper changing table?
No!
Well, of course not. There's no possibility that they would say, once you hit an aquarium, obviously, I think it's just pay dirt. Finally, we're going to, we're going to liberate the fish. It's the Fish Liberation Organization, and they're there. But hold on a second. I have to go to the bathroom. Well, wait a second. You don't have any toddlers with you, do you? No. And I'm not judging, but you're not going to use the diaper changing table in any way, despite the fact you have no children with you? No. Also no. But thank you for, not judging. Good. Okay. Well, then I'll see you back here in a few minutes. Don't put your weapon down on the diaper changing table. The point here is that there's a woman who's got a gun who was around small children, and a lot of them, not just her own, who's thoughtless with her gun. She's thoughtless with her gun in the first place that she keeps it safety off, round chambered, quite honestly. But maybe she's a super expert. But then in that case, don't leave your gun on a diaper changing table. The point is she's ignoring the rules, she's ignoring the law, the posted sign, and ignoring all the safety rules. And she's doing it in a situation where there's almost guaranteed to be something weird going on and something weird going wrong. The kids take off, you're in a cramped space, whatever. She's opted to give up control of her weapon in the middle of a crowded children's area. To no effect. No effect. The DA will do nothing and in fact says that they can't. Here's some more information that answers some of the questions and clears things up. The gun was inside a holster, we guessed that much, and was loaded with 6 bullets when an aquarium visitor found it, prosecutors wrote. It doesn't say so far what it is, but it's beginning to sound like it might have been a revolver, which would also explain why one round was in the firing chamber and the safety was off, prosecutors wrote. If it's a revolver, to have one round chambered, the round is under the firing pin. I mean, that's the normal status of a revolver. Although some people are really super cautious and they keep 1 or 2 rounds out of their revolvers, and the cylinder of the revolver oriented in such a way that the next chamber up, if the trigger were to be pulled either accidentally or on purpose for that matter, would land on an empty chamber, so that you'd have to make a second pull and really be deliberate in all this if you wanted to fire the weapon. But so far, no information about what kind of gun it was, but that would be my guess. But the prosecutor then goes on to say, to prove reckless endangerment, the charge they were considering, prosecutors wrote they would have to prove the woman knew leaving her gun in the restroom could lead to someone getting hurt or killed, but consciously disregarded that risk and went ahead anyway. And quite honestly, she didn't do it unconsciously. She might have done it unthinkingly, but she wasn't unconscious when she did this. She's just dumb, or harried, perhaps, if you want to be generous about it. I think it's a bad reading of it. And also, there's probably other stuff. How about regular endangerment, just child endangerment? That can't be a charge that you level? I don't know. I think that they weren't creative enough in this, but I don't practice in Utah, or anywhere for that matter. It's not enough to prove that she ought to have been aware of the risk, although it really should have been. And by the way, that's legislatively fixable. Just make that the standard when it comes to gun laws. But, if you do that, then you are a gun grabber and you're supposed to go to Russia, except we love Russia. You remember that whole thing. Utah law requires us to show she was aware of the risk but left her gun in the restroom anyway. What kind of stupid law is that? But it would be different, Salt Lake County District Attorney Sim Gill noted, if the woman had said she left the gun in the restroom thinking, I'm going to leave it here, it'll be fine. But that's actually what she did do at best, right? Either before she went into the stall or after coming out of the stall when she said, I can't chase my child with this 1 pound object in my hand. I'll put it here. She didn't say, she certainly didn't say to herself, I'll put this gun right here on this changing table. It'll be dangerous. She actually did say, I'll put it here. It'll be fine, considering what I have to do. It's better than the alternative of me running around on a slippery, perhaps wet tile floor with a gun in my hand. And that might even be true. But she did make a conscious decision to put it there either before entering the stall or after. I don't understand what's the difficulty in figuring this out. The real difficulty is, I don't want to prosecute a gun crime. That's what's happening. The mental state of that versus I just put this to the side because I'm trying to chase a baby and then the other kids take off, it doesn't meet the mens rea. Yes, it does. The law's standard for intent, Gill explained. It was not an easy decision. Yes, it was. Screening prosecutors kept going back and forth. So then just wing it and see what a jury thinks. If it's that close, charge. In this case, no one was injured. But what if someone had been shot by a gun that was left unattended with a round in the chamber and the safety off in or near a children's attraction with a posted no firearms policy? Absent proof that the gun owner knowingly handled the gun in a way that was risky, which she did, Gill said, reckless endangerment still doesn't apply. Is there a gap there? Yes, there is. It's in your head, Mr. District Attorney. Is there a violation available that's a Class A misdemeanor or higher offense level? No, that's the problem. I'll take a B. Gill said his office will forward the case to Draper prosecutors to review lower charges. Hello, thank you. Potentially trespassing. Why not, right? Given the aquarium's posted ban on guns. Utah's concealed carry permits do not extend to, quote, any secured area in which firearms are prohibited and notice posted, according to the Utah Department of Public Safety. But concealed guns are allowed in public schools, for example. Yes, they are, and I'll tell you about that. Meanwhile, Gill said the case shows that Utah's gun laws may not account for the responsibilities of ownership. He acknowledged that many Utahns believe that if a parent cannot secure a gun while taking care of excited young children at a family attraction, bringing the weapon in the first place is reckless. Yeah, so ask them whether they think it's reckless. They'll say yes. If you're right, a jury will say yeah. Most citizens are going to think of it as being negligent, said Gill, and it is, noting that he is a concealed carry permit holder and often in possession of a gun. If you're leaving unattended firearms, that accountability ought to be more immediate. To me, that has nothing to do with the right to possess a gun. It has everything to do with the responsibility of carrying that gun around, Gill said. I'll go one further on you. It has nothing to do with the right to possess a gun because she didn't possess a gun. She gave up possession of the gun. That's the problem. And you know what? Honestly, you could prosecute this case, and if you win, you win. Good. If you lose, it only highlights the necessity for a legislative change better than this news article does, though I'm giving it my best shot to help with it. But you should do that. That's your role. You should say that. I'm a gun owner. I know that's reckless. Prosecute this woman. Anyway, he goes on to say, I understand that there are challenges of daily life, but there is also a necessary urgency of responsibility for an item that's inherently dangerous. Yes. That expectation should have a level of accountability short of reckless behavior. And I don't even know it needs to be short of reckless behavior. You said it was negligent. You said a responsible person wouldn't do it. You said the item is inherently dangerous. That makes it reckless. Period. For example, Gill suggested the legislature could explore criminal violations to be attached to Utah's permit statutes. Can the law be created to say, okay, if you're a concealed carry person, you need to be responsible all the time for what you do with the gun? If it is not on your person and you leave it unattended, here is a category of offense. If there is a subsequent injury that occurs, here is a category of offense. Gill said that would force people to look at their responsibility in different ways, and I would recommend it. Aquarium officials, by the way, declined to comment on Saturday. And here's another picture of the play area, a wider angle, and it's a very nice play area. There's probably a couple of guns in it right now. Not just in this picture, but I mean right now, if you happen to be visiting the aquarium. It reminds me, as I mentioned on Twitter, that it was in Utah where the armed school teacher accidentally shot herself on school property during the day, right? And although there's some dispute about whether she shot herself or whether she was injured when the bullet that was fired shattered the toilet in the faculty bathroom, and sharp porcelain shrapnel injured her. But either way, that injury would not have happened but for the gun. Very few toilets simply spontaneously explode these days, anyway. Back in the olden days when our toilets were more unstable, I can understand it. But, we've discussed this before, and maybe it's old hat for some of you. Maybe you've heard it before. But if not, I'll just sort of, maybe we can sort of long story short it on this one. But the basics were, they armed their teachers. Okay, lots of states are considering that. And you should look to Utah as an example of what could go wrong. In case you bother asking the question, what could go wrong with putting guns in every classroom full of 25 to 30 squirming kids every single day for hours on end? What could possibly happen, right? Well, nothing can happen because we know about guns. We're savvy about our guns here in Utah. We know what the safety rules are. We know what you can and can't do with weapons, what you should and shouldn't do with weapons, how to handle them safely, etc. And besides, for all you snowflakes out there who don't like the idea of your first graders being exposed to firearms risk, 6 hours a day, every day, by a teacher who has, a little something to do during the day besides monitor the status of a firearm. The rules are these. You can carry the weapons, but they have to be concealed. The kids can't see the weapon. They can't. Why not? We're worried about their delicate minds. Whatever the reason, the point is the rules say the kids can't know you're carrying. In addition, they think now, that makes gun owners sad. Oh, what kind of nonsense. Should make kids know that guns are normal. That's what we should be doing. It should be open carry. Well, I don't go in for that psychological stuff about damaging them. All right, we're stuck. We got a problem. All right, luckily we have a super awesome strategic, tactical reason why you should conceal the guns at all times. And I love anything tactical. I hate the idea of worrying about people's psychology. Tell me something awesome and tactical that I could use to kill somebody like a ninja. All right? Tactically, it's unwise to let anyone know who is or who isn't carrying a weapon in this school. Not every teacher will be armed. It's not mandatory. We want the element of surprise. The element of surprise, that way when MS-13 invades our school, they'll think twice. They'll think 3 times. They'll say, I have reason to believe that teacher is armed and that teacher is not. I will attack the gun-free zone over there where the teacher doesn't have a gun. But surprise, that was the teacher who had the gun, and now we have prevailed against MS-13. Well, couldn't it go differently? Like nobody knows that they're there and they get to jump on you, and even if you are armed, you get shot in the head regardless or whatever, No, I've already told you what happens. The criminal comes in and attacks the teacher that he thinks is unarmed, but she really is armed, and she draws and fires and kills him, and the bullet flies out the window across the street and kills a bank robber as well, because of how awesome that gun is and how free we are in America. And no other bad things happen, ever, either before or after with this gun. And then the gun disappears from the face of the earth, and everybody with it. And the hypothetical is over. That's how they imagine these things to go. But they were convinced by the tactical advantage that you gain by not keeping everybody guessing, not really showing who had guns and who didn't. So the rule was, okay, you're going to carry a weapon. 1, nobody in the school is supposed to know that you have decided to carry. You're not supposed to tell anybody. And 2, the kids are never supposed to see the gun. And that has lots of practical applications too. Like if you're just cleaning the gun in class, that's probably a risk. We don't want that. The gun should be produced as few times as possible. And there should be as few transitions with the guns as possible. Something else we've discussed on the air. But anyway, point is, this particular teacher either didn't give a good goddamn what the rules were or just couldn't manage. It was just simply too difficult to actually practically carry a gun in class every day and really honestly keep it concealed. And that's something that ought to be considered. But don't consider it, because then there would be grounds for prohibiting weapons on teachers in the school. So don't mention that. So she kept flagrantly violating this rule. All the kids knew that she had the gun, because every time she'd, bend to pick something up or move funny, you could see the gun sticking out, sometimes underneath the sweater, sometimes it would just peek out entirely and people could see, oh, that's a gun. And they let it go and let it go and let it go because, and here's the thing, who wants to be in a gun crazy state? And Utah isn't even the gun craziest of all of them, but in a gun crazy state where it's a dangerous thing politically to speak out, in any way about any sort of sensible gun safety regulations, much less restrictions, and you get the old go back to Russia thing, even though we love Russia now. I have to reiterate that every time. No one wants to be the one that says, okay, look, the rule was that you can't show the guns. And somewhere in the rule, I'm sure it says, or else something. And either there's no or else something, or no one wants to enforce the or else something. Because if you have persuaded yourself that everyone's safer with that gun in the room, and that the gun itself, the presence of the gun, equals the safety you're after, then there's no possibility that you're going to be the one to take that gun away. Why would you take a gun away from a teacher who just, lets all the kids see it? Because if you take it away, then that classroom isn't safe anymore. It's a gun-free zone, and when MS-13 comes in, they're going to attack that classroom first because they know. Or something. The point is, nobody ever wants to be the one to enforce the rules already on the books and take that gun away or restrict their ability to use their gun, because that's anti-gun, and anti-gun means you have to go to Russia, even though we love Russia, etc., etc. The point is, no matter what package of safety regulations or rules or internal rules that the schools say they're going to impose on their teachers, when push comes to shove, in all likelihood, they're never going to do it. And not just in Utah. In whatever state you happen to be in, they're not going to enforce those rules. Perhaps until somebody gets shot. Then maybe afterwards. Or they might just shake their head like this prosecutor here and say, God, nothing I can do. Doing. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I think we're just about done with the gun thing if I've been boring you to death. But I do have this note here from Left-Leaning Cock. We've called your name on the air before, and it's been fun to do. And I don't know whether you're responding to, oh yeah, look at that, KITM hashtag. So that's the answer. You're responding to what you're hearing on the radio rather than what's being put out on Twitter. Why even accept the bathroom shooter's account? And she didn't shoot anything, but she was a potential shooter. And give me some dramatic music about that. She's a gun. She's a potential shooter. Why even accept the bathroom idiot's account, we'll say, of her children's behavior being a mitigating factor in the crime? She's already shown she's a liar just by bringing a gun into the aquarium, and that's true. Now, I was just saying on Twitter, now, as a thought exercise, you can still go through it and say, even if everything you say is true, you're still in the wrong. And that's worth pointing out. But yeah, I mean, it's a good point. I mentioned people sometimes come up with stories about how those guns fired. Very often, they really are weapons that won't fire if you drop them. Now, a weapon with a round chambered, depending on the weapon itself and what it is perhaps more likely to accidentally fire if dropped than one without a round chambered. I mean, that's just a fact. But I guess what I would say about this is it could just be, you're right, another story. Like people who say, I accidentally fired this gun, whatever, I shot myself, shot a neighbor, or whatever happened. Or, didn't shoot anybody, just fired into the wall, but the police got called because we have a neighbor and they heard the gunshot. What do they usually say? I was cleaning the gun when it accidentally went off. Now, as we've discussed again on the show and in gun fail articles, etc., if you're really cleaning a gun, there's very little opportunity to fire a loaded weapon because you unload guns before cleaning them. Don't clean guns while they're still loaded. That's kind of a rule, but, we're never really sure what exactly they were doing and what exactly what part of the process they were in. And one of the mitigating problems is that with semi-automatic weapons, very often they are built such that you cannot break the gun apart in order to clean it without pulling the trigger. That's part of the mechanism of getting the firing mechanism opened in and out of the way so that you can then, break the gun apart to clean it. And that's sort of unfortunate and maybe not a great design thing, but that's the way it is. And either people who know that they're supposed to do that to break the gun apart have forgotten. Sometimes they just flat forget to take the magazine out, which is incredible. And sometimes, of course, and perhaps in some ways even more incredible, that they took the magazine out but forgot that with semi-automatic weapons there can still be a round chambered, and that round doesn't automatically get sucked out of the chamber and back into the magazine just because you took the magazine out. It's still there. You got to remove all of them. But people, even who are experts, get complacent, get stupid, get tired, forgetful. I took the magazine out. I usually don't keep a round chambered, but this time I actually did. And then I pull the trigger, just thinking I'm dry firing the gun to break it apart. Pow, there's a bullet in it. But, so that can happen. But very frequently also people say, I think sometimes people accidentally fire the weapon in some other manner and then say, I was cleaning it. Why? Because they see in the newspaper that, somebody said they accidentally fired their gun. They were going to be in trouble, but they said, I was cleaning it and it accidentally went off. And for some reason, they believe that that works. So I'll just say that. Or I dropped it and it went off. Sometimes that's an issue too. This kind of gun, you could drop it all day long. It won't go off. It's built for that. Some manufacturers actually know that happens and they design their weapon. Now, why they can't also design something that can break apart in a different way, I don't know, but we could discuss that some other time perhaps. But I have a feeling that a lot of the drop and discharges, a lot of I was cleaning it, all those stories are, some portion of them are really, I had my finger on the trigger. I was dumb and I was not paying attention and I accidentally pulled the trigger. Or I thought it was unloaded and I was dry firing it to break it apart and it fired and I surprised myself. But that's a very frequent kind of lie. And if that wasn't sufficient for this situation, then I don't see any reason why, given how many supposedly responsible gun owners are perfectly willing to make up a little white lie about how that gun got fired, then I assume they would likewise be willing to make up a little white lie about how that gun got left on a diaper changing table too. We really shouldn't accept it at face value, but as I guess if you're going to have that argument, if you can basically convict the person, although here clearly in literal sense they cannot convict the person. Because they won't even charge them. Now, I think they could charge them and they have a pretty good chance of convicting them, but whatever. If you think you can't get a conviction based on the real story, then I guess, you're out of luck. But, but if you can take the story at face value and show how you still made a huge mistake and should never make this mistake again, and you really should be considered a irresponsible lout when it comes to the guns. Great with the kids, lout with the gun, then, even by what you described, there's a problem here. Do you understand? I'm trying to say that you need to take some responsibility here. You keep trying to push responsibility off yourself by telling these stories. Even if your story is true, you're still irresponsible. But then again, we're not supposed to irritate people. We're supposed to bring them into our trust circle. And what can I tell you? So in addition to telling her she made a mistake, or not telling her that, please don't do that. You'll embarrass her. And also don't talk to her about her voting for Trump. She will not like that. And then maybe by osmosis, she will absorb the correct lessons later on and get things straight in her life. Or, get help with watching the kids. One or the other. Who knows? Whichever you decide. Okay, this can't be the the way I spend the rest of my day. Although, you know that, I mean, physically it could happen, but I don't mean for it to happen. There are other stories that we need to get to, including another gun story. Brian Monroe brought this to my attention yesterday morning and then really highlighted the problem. We usually, make note when there are mass shootings either going on or just previously having occurred when we get on the air. And we missed one, and we missed it because Canada. It happened in Canada. And Canada's very close to us. I don't know if you know this, but we actually neighbor. Not a lot of people know that we're right next door to Canada. We share a border, which is amazing, and people don't know this. And there was a shooting in Toronto, and other countries, I don't know, they somehow even managed, like a lot of people got shot. I don't know all the facts, but 2 people, I believe, were killed in this sort of random attack that a gunman showed up at a coffee place in a very nice Tony neighborhood of Toronto and just started shooting. And as I recall, I mean, we're talking about something like 10, 12, there we are, 13, 10, 12, it's a little close, right? 13 injured, 2 people were killed in this attack, and I understand that I believe a 10-year-old girl was among those killed, which just adds that much more heartache to the whole situation. But even in your mass shootings, you managed to come away better, Canada. In our mass shooting, that would have been an AR-15, and everybody would have been dead. And so I don't know what to tell you. But the point really is that a mass shooting happened. It didn't happen in our country. That's true. But drawing those kind of hard lines, especially if there's anything to do with the idea of gun violence like that, random public gun violence spreading to Canada from the United States. I mean, I don't know that I don't know if you can make any claim about where the gun came from, or for that matter, I mean, even harder would be trying to establish where the idea came from. Apparently, the shooter mentally disturbed, as is almost always the case. Can't help matters that he has a name that would likely identify him as Islamic. That will only complicate matters. But really, I just wanted to kind of back up and take note of the fact that, whenever we have a shooting in this country, well, if it's in this country, then by definition, it isn't in Canada, right? That's sort of the way things work. And yet the Canadians take note. And, maybe it's that everybody sort of gets some kind of weird guilty pleasure out of seeing the Americans destroy themselves with their guns, and say, thank God this doesn't happen, at least very often, in our country, and so we'll take note of it. But I think it's pretty genuine when they say, this tragedy, I can't believe this continues to happen in your country, but our hearts go out to you, and we infrequently return the favor, even when it's a direct neighbor. And I felt like, okay, now as a matter of policy, I am paying attention to gun fail in the United States. People very frequently point out gun fail incidents that happen in other countries. They happen a lot less frequently than they happen here, but we take note of them, but I don't count them when I'm making my lists. But, for particularly spectacular ones, sometimes we'll make mention of it, just to let people know that borders have nothing to do with it. But we probably should have made note of this one. And there have been gun attacks in Canada before that were noteworthy, and we did make note of. And this one sort of didn't make the radar, which is just sort of an interesting way of discussing, once again, what an American's news radar looks like. There's this giant blank spot, that ends at the border. And quite frankly, a lot of what happens at the interior of our country is in that blind spot too. But, so what can we say? Our hearts do go out, and I want to resort to thoughts and prayers there. But some of the things that we think we ought to do about guns and controlling access to them in this country are actually in place in Canada, and it still happens. And yeah, it's true that you can't prevent everything from happening ever to everyone, but they're still doing pretty good with their guns by comparison up there in Canada. So what can we say? That's bad news, and we hope that they're able to recover from it as quickly as possible. I'm taking a look at, what is this? This chart here that one is supposedly, I guess, documenting the incident itself, but there's another thing here. Yes, Toronto year-to-date shootings as of July 19, 2018. There's a map of Toronto's, well, look at this. I mean, it's Toronto's Greektown area, and the chart says mass shooting in Toronto's Greektown, but then there's just a chart of individual shootings, and it looks like there's plenty of gun violence in Toronto, as it turns out. And I think we may have messed you guys up a little bit there, too. But that's a city thing, too. Where there are people, very frequently there are guns. And where there are both people and guns, there are shootings. So, I don't know. It's a surprising thing. This chart here looks like year-to-date shootings. There's quite a number of them. I assume that we would get even thicker coverage in some of our more gun-prone areas here in this country, not necessarily all urban either, but certainly per capita, I think the rural gangs are doing their part to make sure that there's plenty of shootings here in America, that we can compete with our Canadian friends to the north. All right, well, duly noted, I suppose. Not something I usually spend a great deal of time on, even when it's a mass shooting here in this country, just because my focus is on usually the gun errors, unless there's some extraordinary aspect of what's going on. Let's see. Here's something to follow up with the storyline we established yesterday, and this is a good Tuesday storyline, I guess. Tuesday and Friday, where we sometimes explore these further ranging things. And I threw out there, and then I tweeted afterwards, the notion that what if the strange brand of transnational white nationalism, I guess is what I should say. It puzzled me. How can you be a transnational nationalist? I think maybe the white nationalist label is incorrect. I mean, the white part of it seems to be correct. I question whether or not you're a traditional nationalist, but I get the sense that they're using nationalist in a slightly different with a slightly different meaning when they say it. And a white nationalist is supposed to be sort of polite code for white separatist or racist or Nazi. And I don't know whether we're doing an effective job with that or not. But I'm wondering whether we ought to throw out the nationalist part. And whether there is, I just sort of started to speculate, like last week and into this week, what I was actually sort of speculating about what are the sorts of political theories under which a thoughtful Trump, if there were one, or a thoughtful Trump devotee, if there were one, could claim that there was a legitimate reason that had nothing to do or less, let's say, than was imagined to do with bribery or emoluments or blackmail or any of the other common theories about why Trump seems so willing to do Putin's bidding. And the one we hit upon was, well, you know, it could, theoretically, you could be making the claim that it's the president's prerogative to conduct public policy this way, that for whatever reason, for good or for ill, and there are going to be people who will argue both, the president, to whom we've delegated this authority to set foreign policy and public policy in general when it comes to, you know, relations, foreign relations, it would be within the legitimate purview of a president to pursue closer relations with a country that was traditionally considered a rival or antagonist. It would be within the prerogative of a president even to pursue closer political cooperation with anybody, whether previously an antagonist or not. Certainly it would be normally in the interest of the United States to pursue closer political relations and maybe even coordination of certain policies with countries with whom we shared common values, perhaps common culture, perhaps not common culture, but a common border or some other common interest. But that the history of the world certainly has a number of examples where people divided by sometimes arbitrary national borders find that there's a cultural similarity that crosses, that spans that border, where the political situation has allowed for it, closer political ties or even outright formal political union has been pursued. Sometimes peaceably, sometimes not so peaceably, sometimes with the best of intentions in somebody's mind. I'm sure somebody else thought it was the worst thing they ever heard of. Sometimes not. Anschluss of Austria, an annexing of Austria and the Sudetenland of what was then Czechoslovakia, for instance, because they had German populations and Greater Germany wanted to absorb them. Nah, that one didn't work out all that well. On the other hand, we have, sometimes we have more sympathetic feelings, for instance, about, say, creating a Kurdish homeland where the Kurdish populations, which span sometimes arbitrary national borders, maybe they should be given their own conglomerated territory so that they can live independently or autonomously, at least as Kurds, and have self-determination. That one has all sorts of problems attached to it, mixed results on that one. But also, things like the United Arab Republic, short-lived, but and difficult to, I'm sure, to deal with given the non-contiguity of it. But, that's not by itself a barrier to trying anyway. I don't know if it's ever been successfully done. But, political allegiances and the borders, they change all the time. We tend to think of them as something permanent for some reason, but borders have always been in flux. Could it really be, though, that, were we just superimposing this idea that, well, if you were really actually pursuing some sort of either closer political cooperation or outright political union, then these things might be explainable, or even, you might be able to explain why people think this is okay. Like we were saying yesterday, the true alt-right MAGA all-in weirdos are already at the point where they're saying there's literally, so what if Russia interfered, as you say, in our election? What's the big deal? It's a good thing. They're actually welcoming it. And I guess we said, under the theory where you're really pursuing closer political cooperation and or political union, there would be nothing wrong in the mind of somebody who saw political union as an inevitability. They would likely say, well, along the way, theoretically, there ought to be nothing wrong. You would consider there to be nothing wrong with Russians just participating in our electoral process. After all, we're all one, or we all will be eventually. And there may be people who say, well, up until that point, it would be considered illegal, but it's perhaps ill-considered that it's not already legalized, as we might use that to hasten political union. But are there really people who would say, yeah, political union is the aim here, or are we just theorizing that was the case? Well, I fear that there may be some. And they're still pretty fringy, I think. But I actually got a couple of Twitter notes from people who said that there really were people who believed in this. And like I said, rather fringy. And I think the name that came up was Alexander Dugin. Is that the name of he's the sort of he's the sort of weirdo. We've dismissed him, and we may be right in all this. in dismissing him as the weirdo, alt-right, white nationalist, white transnationalist political philosopher, a Russian guy. And, he occupies that space wherein it is sometimes difficult to tell the difference between people who are genuinely steeped in academic study and theorization at this level about political philosophy and, iconoclasts who have read just enough to make themselves sound like they're, inscrutable and impenetrable like a good intellectual ought to be, but really have only a paper-thin understanding of what they're discussing and the kind of personality that intimidates everybody else out of actually probing and testing them because they might explode and or kill you right then and there, and nobody really wants that. And sometimes it's difficult to tell the difference between the two, and sometimes people who we ordinarily think of as occupying one or the other of those circles, in fact, possess characteristics of both, or in fact turn out to be the other one, or what have you. Anyway, Alexander Dugin apparently has spent a considerable amount of time theorizing on just that, and if I read it correctly in my very brief skim of it, because I still consider him to be one of those just irritating iconoclasts that, well, at least his fans are. They make it impossible to do any serious study of what it is he's saying, even if it's just to find out whether or not it's something you should dismiss. You're just uncomfortable being around them or discussing this stupid idea with them. But it seems like his, what did he call it? The fourth, I can't even remember what he calls it now. But if you Google it, it's pretty quick. Let's see. Dugin, fourth political theory. That's what he calls it. The fourth political theory. Which, whenever people number things like that, whether it was Alvin Toffler in the third wave or now Alexander Dugin in the fourth political theory, I get leery about these things. But it seems that he's been out there philosophizing, and people who feel like they need to have some sort of ideological underpinning to their white transnationalism and MAGA hats and loving Russia and Trump at the same time, whatever, they can somehow justify it by saying, oh yeah, I'm into Alexander Dugin and the fourth political theory, which may, in fact, if I understand correctly what's going on there, be the sort of theory that intends to land on, yes, there really ought to be overt political transnational union among, well, in this case, essentially white, northern white states. And, there are various complications with that, but it's out there. And I don't know how serious it is and how widespread the belief in it really is, but the fact that it's there, a lot of people like to just latch on to stuff like that and say, see, I have an intellectual underpinning. I don't understand it, but if you also don't understand it, I can say I'm smarter than you because I can tell you to Google something. You'll Google it and it's gobbledygook and it doesn't make any goddamn sense. But the fact is, I told you Google it and there's a body of writing on it and there's a lot of words and some of the words are very big. And so therefore I, who told you to Google it, am smarter than you. You didn't even know it was there, did you? That just proves that you're a dummy. But there really is a philosophy out there that ends on, political union as between the post-capitalist northern white states, and that all these states, and for the most part, destined to collapse anyway, America chief among them, and to the extent that we can hasten it and create a transnational Eurasian white political culture, the sooner the better, according to those guys. And there you have it. It's manifesting itself all over Europe, and it is theorized anyway among the people who both worship this strange political theory and worship Putin, that this is the theory that's shaping Putin's policy with foreign policy with respect to his Eurasian neighbors and even the United States. So it's not completely out of nowhere, but, often that's the case with theories like these. I often say there's a level on which they're true, but I don't know that any of the people that we see espousing them most openly, publicly, really believe or understand them, but it's out there. When we come back, I have another article that sort of fits into this framework that I might share. And it fits both with the possibility of like real, honest to God, open and obvious political union transnationally, and also harkens back to what we were reading from Brian Beutler yesterday when he was talking about the natural alliance that these people saw between Russia and the United States. That terminology comes up again, and it comes from a source you might not have guessed at earlier. We'll be right back. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. And let's see. I think I had my mute button did not engage during that, so that was fun. But luckily we had some music playing. This is the piece that I thought would harken back to what we were reading from Brian Beutler the other day. His piece mentioned a natural alliance that was seen from, Trump acolyte activists here in the United States as between the United States and Russia, and natural alliance as exemplified, I guess, in the in the work of Maria Butina and her ability to spot vulnerabilities, I guess, if you're looking at it from this side. And natural alliances, if you were looking at it from their side, as between Russians and the NRA here in the United States. Gun enthusiasts in both places. There really aren't a whole lot of gun enthusiasts in the legal realm in Russia. Your average everyday Russian doesn't have the opportunity to be the kind of gun enthusiast that we have here. But there are a lot of ex-military or ex-intelligence agents who, have a free hand under the Putin government to do it, and therefore to terrorize the rest of the populace, and in so doing maintain Putin's rule, but whatever. Anyway, this is from Newsweek, which we don't often turn to, but the piece is by Alexandra Hutzler and is entitled Southern Nationalist Group, and you might recognize it when you hear the name. Southern Nationalist Group creates Russian language website page to foster relationship between the, quote, two natural allies. Now, first of all, the Southern Nationalist Group. Why should it matter where, geographically speaking, the nationalist group is centered? Well, it's not that we think it's interesting because it's in the southern part of our country, but rather that it is oriented around the southern identity. In other words, this is the League of the South that we're talking about, which is a neo-Confederate hate group, according to like the Southern Poverty Law Center and others. And they're right, it is, but neo-Confederate. So we're talking not about the geographic South per se, but rather the old Confederate South. And of course, how much sense does it make to talk about Confederates as nationalists, given that they were all about secession? they were Southern nationalists, perhaps, and wanted to establish their own Southern state and national identity. But to the extent that they no longer seem to be interested specifically in putting a lot of their efforts into secession, but rather simply stoking the hatred and white supremacy that went along with the original secessionist movement. Yeah, the whole secession part is hard work, but hating people who are different from me is very easy, and I'd like to focus on that if you don't mind. Now it's a nationalist group. I don't know. Anyway, one might wonder, what the hell are we talking about here? One, why would there be neo-Confederates? And two, why would they be interested in Russia? And three, why would they spend the time, they can't even get back to the original message of secession. I'm too busy to secede. I just want to hate black people and maybe people of every other color and possibly people of other religions too, no matter what color they are. And I also, though, I do have time to add on top of this that I'd like to communicate to Russians, because Russians are notoriously Southern, right? Everyone loves the South there in Russia. It's very warm, just as it is in the American South, humid and cotton-growing region, and they need lots of slaves. They don't. Of course, it's cold, and they have the original slaves, Slavs. So that's, something. We have that going for us, I guess. What sort of, natural alliance is there between Russia, far-flung Russia, and the insular American South? And the answer is the internet and hatred. And that's all you need. The League of the South, an organization described by analysts as a neo-Confederate hate group, has launched a Russian language page, because of the number of Russians in Alabama, on their website to explore shared ideas on Southern nationalism for those most Southern of people, Russians. There's a South, of course, to Russia, but okay. We understand that the Russian people and Southerners are natural allies in blood, culture, and religion. Michael Hill, the League's president, wrote in a letter addressed to our Russian friends. The note was published online on July 17th, a day after President Donald Trump met with and praised Russian leader Vladimir Putin in Helsinki, Finland, the southern capital of Europe. Helsinki. Of course, what he means by that is natural allies in blood, culture, and religion. Southern Baptists and Russian Orthodox. That's very similar. One is nothing like the other, and the other has nothing in common with the one. So therefore, common and natural allies in blood. Scots-Irish, Russian. And I guess there's people who will say, well, if you go far enough back, their theory is it's all Viking blood. The Vikings populated Russia and the Baltic states, as well as Scandinavia, and even made it all the way to North America, etc. But likewise, also raided along the coasts and influenced the culture of Scotland and Ireland and England. And, to an extent, it's all true. There were some pirates, essentially, which is what Vikings were, floating around in the area. And they were very successful. They had a very successful world tour, as I was reminded while I was in Iceland. I saw a great T-shirt about that now. And I bought several hundred of them for distribution among my friends in the League of the South, of which I have none. But it was a funny, it's a good comment. And historically, based in some fact, I guess, the Viking World Tour T-shirt. Didn't buy it for myself because it has implications now. But, had a picture of a stylized Viking guy there. The Northman cometh, it said, and had the tour dates listed on a shirt, like a concert T-shirt. 791 England, 795 Wales, 799 France, 807 Ireland, 826 Russia, 844, Spain. They really were far, they ventured pretty far from home. 845, Morocco. Interestingly, 860 is the date they have down here for Iceland, which is about true. No one knows exactly what the date was, although the t-shirt I bought had like 879 AD as the founding of Reykjavik. Anyway, Reykjavik, if you don't mind. Or I guess if we really want to try the pronunciation, they roll their R's there. Reykjavik. Anyway, but interesting. I guess arguably, what happened to this, right? If you're going to be talking Northern heritage and everything, and they populated and influenced the culture. Spain and Morocco, are we ready to admit them as Nordic? No? Why not? Is it because essentially they, repelled your invasion and kicked your ass? Is that what we're saying? Or are we just saying, well, they turned brown later and we don't like them now? And also just interesting, Iceland, very much, associated with the Viking culture. Should it be? I don't know, because they were in Spain and Morocco before they were in Iceland. By the way, 921 Greece and 937 Italy. And only when the clock ticked around to the millennium there, 1000, America listed last. So, I guess if you're crazy enough to involve yourself with something called the League of the South at this point, you might just as well say, yeah, sure, all those countries listed, basically Nordic stock and Nordic culture and nothing else, no taco trucks, whatever. And so, therefore, natural allies in blood, culture, and religion. Now, many things have happened since 900 AD, and Nordic culture didn't take root, as far as I am aware, in Spain or Morocco or Italy or Greece, and I guess maybe to some extent elsewhere. They may have a better claim with Russia. I guess, way back, you might have a better claim with, there's a theory under which you can say, well, 1,500 years ago, Scots, Irish, Russian, Nordic culture might have had more in common than it does now. But, it's pretty shaky ground, and we might as well just focus on what they're doing now. At this point, which is, I think, ultimately that much more interesting because it could affect us here. It makes a nice historical study. But the Alabama-based group, I wasn't kidding when I said Alabama, defines itself as, quote, a quote, Southern nationalist organization, which is problematic, like I said, in its own right, unless they're talking about secession again, and I think they're just too lazy for that, with chapters in 16 states, and I'll bet some of them didn't secede originally, committed to preserving white Christian culture. And basically that's what it's all about. White, and also we might as well say Christian because it allows us to hate on some other people too. I don't know that they would recognize Russian Orthodoxy as anything like what they consider to be Christianity, but if you wear a cross around your neck when you say you hate black people, that's enough for us. Anyway, it has been called a hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center, which is usually right about these things. The letter posted by the group says that the South and Russia are two natural allies against threats of globalism and mass migration. In other words, Russian conservatives are angry about mass migration, and American conservatives are angry about it too. As fellow whites of Northern European extraction, Scots-Irish is Northern European, that's true. We come from the same general gene pool. That hasn't really been the case for a long, long time, but whatever. As inheritors of the European cultural tradition, we share similar values, customs, and ways of life. And as Christians, we worship the same Lord and Savior, St. Basil, Jesus Christ also, by the way, in there. And our common faith binds us as brothers and sisters, Hill wrote, because Christians never fight Christians. Hill encourages the two groups to, quote, take advantage of the climate of increasing trust and friendship between us, unquote, and believes that the creation of a Russian language page is the first step in that direction. It's actually probably the first step in the direction of getting money from Russia for your operations. The piece is illustrated, by the way, with a photo of a Confederate battle flag, which isn't really the Confederate flag or anything, but, we've sort of substituted the motif from the top of the General Lee for a Confederate flag. And a Trump Make America Great Again flag flying on the same pole. And a very freshly unfolded Confederate flag and Trump flag, too. So these are not things that they're flying daily. They flew it for the picture. I always find that interesting when you run into somebody who's got a Confederate flag just bought from the store. Anyway, the organization's announcement arrived shortly after President Trump controversially boasted of a warm relationship with Russian President Vladimir Putin, despite nearly universally accepted evidence that Russia, at Putin's behest, interfered in the 2016 U.S. presidential election. At a one-on-one meeting in Helsinki, Finland, last week, Trump said he sided with Putin over the assessment of interference made by his own intelligence agencies. You know this story, of course. And then something, and he was extremely strong and powerful, and so therefore I really liked it. Shortly after the summit with Putin in Finland, Trump tweeted that he looked forward to their next meeting and has told his administration to formally invite the Russian leader to Washington later this year. You all know that story. And by the way, I can't recall. Somebody asked me if this was sort of unprecedented. I don't know that it is, but it certainly is with a Russian leader. I guess, do any of you have any recollection or know anything historically about an American president being so dependent on a particular foreign leader that they had to meet so frequently? Trump hasn't been in office 2 years yet, and this will be like the third or is it the fourth private meeting with Putin. One, just one where there was arranged to be a meeting between the two of them, the Helsinki summit, which wasn't a summit, but which they had in Helsinki because that was neutral ground, and that's where summits are held. You remember, he was trying to recreate Reykjavik as Reagan and Gorbachev enjoyed it. This, I guess, would be a second specially arranged trip simply for Putin and Trump to meet, to have him come to Washington. But then there was also the G20, but I think twice they bumped into one another at certain G groups and split off, or maybe I just remember. I can say once for sure that I recall. Remember when Trump was sitting across from the Japanese first lady and claimed that she didn't speak any English, or she claimed she didn't speak English, so he would go away and he drifted down to go talk to Putin. But I think there was another time too. I just don't know. Is there any foreign leader that an American president met with as frequently and took time out, to confer with as frequently in public, person to person, as these two? I don't know. I don't know if it means anything by itself, but it's out there. Anyway, analysts say there is a growing alliance between Russia, white nationalists, and the movement that propelled President Trump to power. And that, I think, is what we're seeing unfold every day. The current Russian government, which is a very important government, cites figures who are unambiguously fascist and Nazi. Historian Timothy Snyder said in a recent interview with Public Books. Okay. This is an extreme example of a general trend. Steve Bannon cites Julius Evola, or I don't know how it's like Ebola, but with a V. Snyder said, speaking of an Italian writer linked to fascism. Donald Trump speaks of America first, and so on. There's been a kind of renaissance of the 1930s, which has crept up on us. Interesting way of putting it, and I just thought a good data point in all this, and of course the reference to natural allies and the somewhat ridiculous stretches that they're making in order to make claims that there are common cultural and even genetic links between the League of the South and whoever. I don't know, Vikings, Russians, both, whatever they need at the time, I'm sure they'll claim. So anyway, I guess that's by way of pointing out that the rather frightening prospect that we speculated about might really have some theoretical basis out there, even if not a basis in reality. My guess, though, when it comes to the League of the South is that, if that's a theory that they can hang their hat on, great, they'll do it. But they probably put up a Russian language page in the interest of getting money from somebody somewhere and funding their activities with a dash of cash injected by Russian oligarchs at the behest of Vladimir Putin. The thinking being, to the extent that we can twist the knife and create more division and chaos by funding bigoted hate groups like the League of the South, so that they then carry a Confederate flag and go march someplace and get in fights with people, and everybody focuses on that for a few days, and Trump says there's good people on both sides, and it raises the chaos level. There may not be any more of an end game to it than that, but it worries me that there will always be people out there, and I guess I only help them by trying to theorize that there was some high-minded theory under which Russian interference in our elections was actually a legitimate thing to do. Well, legitimate or not, they are doing it, and it's not just limited to elections, of course, though there's lots of news about that possibility. But here, I guess the latest hot number making the rounds, the story that Russian hackers have reportedly accessed U.S. electric utilities control rooms. Widely discussed. I think I missed the first round of articles on that one and instead ended up here at CNET with their report on the situation. Hackers could have caused, they say, blackouts, federal officials tell the Wall Street Journal, which I do not subscribe to, and so I didn't click on their link because I wasn't certain I was going to get anywhere by trying to read a Wall Street Journal article, but instead we'll read the CNET description of it. Hackers working for Russia were able to gain access to the control rooms of U.S. electric utilities last year, allowing them, anyway, to cause blackouts, federal officials tell the Wall Street Journal. And it is a linked article here. I wonder if I can open it up and whether it'll let me. Sometimes, yeah, they've unlocked this one for now. If I try to open it up again later, we won't be able to take a look. So, now that my page has refreshed itself, I am sure that it will not permit me to read it. Let's just see if we can't click this box away. There we are. One more time back. Let's read it while we got it and consider it a gift. Russian hackers say reach U.S. utility control rooms, Homeland Security officials say. As we know, the blackouts could have been caused. This is Rebecca Smith, so at least we'll read the original reporting here. Hackers working for Russia, and again, what does that mean? Were they working for Russian government, Russian intelligence, which is also Russian government, Putin himself, oligarchs who depend for their oligarchiness on Putin's good graces, and so therefore ought to be considered pseudo-governmental in some way. Hackers working for Russia claimed hundreds of victims last year in a giant and long-running campaign that put them inside the control rooms of U.S. electric utilities where they could have caused blackouts, federal officials said. They said the campaign likely is continuing. The Russian hackers, who worked for a shadowy state-sponsored group, there's your answer, previously identified as Dragonfly or Energetic Bear, if you like the bear taxonomy more than anything else, broke into supposedly secure air-gapped or isolated networks owned by utilities with relative ease by first penetrating the networks of key vendors who had trusted relationships with the power companies, said officials at the Department of Homeland Security. That is interesting and a nice hacking technique to discuss too, right? Air-gapped meaning, I guess, I've seen people complaining, well, what are these utilities doing connecting their grid to the internet? That's stupid. And apparently the first, well, they think that they are disconnected. They think there's a gap, an air gap between the internet at large and their control rooms. And I guess there's no direct connection between their control room computers and the internet. But as you can see here, they do have closed private networking connections with trusted partners of some kind, and, you know, everybody needs a trusted partner. And those guys are connected to the internet, so you can worm your way into a vendor that does business with a public, you know, an electrical utility, and get into their network, and then use their private gateway to the control rooms to get in just the same. They got to the point where they could have thrown switches and disrupted power flows, said Jonathan Homer, chief of Industrial Control System Analysis for DHS. DHS has been warning utility executives with security clearances, who might all have them revoked now, about the Russian group's threat to critical infrastructure since 2014. But the briefing on Monday was the first time that the DHS has given out information in an unclassified setting with as much detail. It continues to withhold the names of victims, but now says there were hundreds of victims, not a few dozen, as had been said previously. It also said some companies still may not know that they have been compromised, which is bad, because the attacks used credentials of actual employees to get inside utility networks, potentially making the intrusions more difficult to detect. The solution, kill all your employees, and then if they access the system afterwards, then you know you have the Russians dead to rights. Experts have been warning about the Russian threat for some time. They've been intruding into our networks and are positioning themselves for a limited or widespread attack, said Michael Carpenter, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, who is now a senior director at the Penn Biden Center at the University of Pennsylvania. They are waging a covert war on the West. War. You know what that means. That guy says he loves nuclear war. Russia has denied targeting critical infrastructure. Why not? Although, why not brag on it, I'd say, I guess. All right, Mr. Homer said the cyber attack, which surfaced in the U.S. in the spring of 2016 and continued through 2017, exploited relationships that utilities have with vendors who have special access to update software, run diagnostics on equipment, and perform other services that are needed to keep millions of pieces of gear in working order. You can't have people driving out to places. Then you would have to employ more people. The attackers began by using conventional tools, spear phishing emails and watering hole attacks, which trick victims into entering their passwords on spoofed websites to compromise the corporate networks of suppliers, many of whom were smaller companies without big budgets for cybersecurity. It's a good thought, really. Once inside the vendor networks, they pivoted to their real focus, the utilities. It was a relatively easy process in many cases for them to steal credentials from vendors and gain direct access to utility networks. They then began stealing confidential information. For example, the hackers vacuumed up information showing how utility networks were configured, what equipment was in use, and how it was controlled. They also familiarized themselves with how the facilities were supposed to work because attackers have to learn how to take the normal and make it abnormal to cause disruptions, said Mr. Homer. Their goal, he said, to disguise themselves as the people who touch these systems on a daily basis. Ew. DHS is conducting the briefings for our plan, hoping for more industry cooperation. One thing the agency is trying to learn is whether there are new infections and whether the Russians have figured out ways to defeat security enhancements like multi-factor authentication. In addition, DHS is looking for evidence that the Russians are automating their attacks, which investigators worry could presage a large increase in hacking efforts. To scale, they're eventually going to have to automate, Mr. Homer said. You're seeing an uptick in the way government is sharing threats and vulnerabilities, said Scott Aronson, a cybersecurity expert for Edison Electric Institute, the utility industry trade group. He said information sharing and penetration detection have gotten much better since the Dragonfly attacks began. It isn't clear yet whether the hackers used their access to prepare the battlefield for some future devastating blow, investigators said. For example, many experts fear that a skilled technician could use unfettered access to change some equipment's settings. That could make them unreliable in unexpected ways, causing utility engineers to do things that would result in extensive damage and potentially lengthy blackouts. And there have been a number of them in the past, too, and even ones that we have blamed in the past on cyber attacks from other countries. But we never really ever did figure out what to do about those things. I mean, it's been years, right? Don't you remember? It's been years now that we've been talking about the need to secure and update our electrical grid. That would count as infrastructure, and we could take care of it during Infrastructure Week, which used to be every other week before we turned every week into Russia is a hoax week. But, you know, well, Trump was never really the guy that anybody should have been relying on to get anything done on that. And that was probably even before we realized that he had good reason, well, bad reason really, to opt not to get anything done about it and not to get in the way of Putin and or Russia and or some combination of them, given whatever the circumstances are. Still seeing people out there pretty sure that Trump being quote-unquote tough on Russia means that there's no collusion, or at least that there's less solid evidence of collusion, even though the collusion is with Putin, not with Russia per se, though there is obviously some collusion going on with what I guess passes for Russia per se, because governmental elements are being used to do some of the bidding of Putin. But again, keep in mind, please, every time somebody offers that defense, you should be examining it that way. I don't really know that the dealings here are with Russia, and I don't really know that Russian interests are the same as Putin's interests. Even most people who say that aren't willing to say that they believe that Trump's interests are America's interests, so why should it be difficult to believe that Russia's interests aren't necessarily Putin's interests? You would think that would be easier to believe. Anyway, if not, if you want something easier to believe, stay tuned for Justice Putnam and the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy coming up next, and we'll try and cram some of the material he plans to bring you into what comes next.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Let's see, here's what we got. A little bit more about those security clearances. Now they're suggesting even Obama's security clearance could be yanked if he doesn't STFU, as Justice puts it. What else has he got? Accidentally released documents show the Interior Department cravenly prioritized industry over public lands. Who could possibly believe it? You will after this.